Hello and welcome to Fun Problems, the problems of fun. I'm Peter C. Hayward.
And I'm Alex Cutler. AJ Brandon.
This is our second episode ever without AJ. Yesterday I recorded with AEG doing a part of our publisher series, and AJ had a snowstorm. Today he said, I just don't like Alex. I could jump on this call, just don't want to. Today we are doing a design diary for Critter Kitchen, which is a co-design between me and Alex. And we used to do design diaries on this podcast all the time. We sort of stepped away from it. But I wanted to come back with Critter Kitchen because I think we learned so much from making that. And there are so many actionable lessons that we can talk about. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Alex, what is Critter Kitchen? Oh, Alex Cutler is a designer. He's been on the show before. He'd killed the podcast for 2 years. Notoriously. Any bio stuff?
Yeah. So Critter Kitchen, Peter and I are co-designers of this game. It was on Kickstarter, I guess about 18 months ago-ish, from Cardboard Alchemy. It's the publisher, and it is
they're the creator of Flamecraft and Andromeda's Edge and Vision of Catastrophe.
Same artist as Flamecraft, same publishers, Flamecraft, Andromeda's Edge. It is fulfilling right now. This podcast is being recorded April 1st. We should have done something for April Fools. I should have been like, hey, it's me, AJ.
The joke is, Alex, that I don't actually want to do this episode. The end. You thought you were wanted.
Just like our whole friendship. So it's fulfilling now, and it'll be in stores sometime this month, I think. And it is a game that was kickstarted, and Peter's probably talked about it a lot on the podcast, but since
incessantly, some of my co-hosts would say.
Since we're focusing the whole episode on it, should we do like a brief overview of the game, or do you just
you do thematic, I'll do mechanical, which is sort of our dynamic.
So Critter Kitchen is a cozy adjacent game, at least in terms of aesthetic and art style. We are all critter chefs in the town of Bistro Bay. We are gathering ingredients, putting them together to fulfill little recipes, and also please a critic who's coming into town at the end of the game. It is competitive, but because of the art and the low stakes of cooking versus saving the world or something, it does tend to sort of feel cozy.
The core mechanism of the game is that everyone has the same 3 workers. We never quite found the right word for it, but workers is the closest thing. Everyone has a mouse who's a teeny tiny little meeple who, wherever they go, they're going to get the first pick, but they're so small they can only carry 1 thing. Everyone's got a lizard who will get the second pick, but can only carry 2 things, and everyone has a big boar who goes last, but can carry 3 things.
Yeah, in our relationship, I'm the big boar.
I'm a zoo chef. That central tension. So I've talked on the show before about how, for me, I need a central mechanism from which everything grows, and that was very much the core of Critter Kitchen. Every decision we made came from, how do we emphasize this? Because it was an interesting choice. Basically, you've got an array of options. What do I want the most? What do I want? What do I care about the least, or what do I want the most of? Is essentially the way to play it. And so even when I'm teaching it, I tell people, look out the board. Whatever you want most, send your boar there. Send your mouse there. Whatever you want second most, send your lizard there. Whatever you want your boar at most, whatever you want third most, send your boar there. And it obviously doesn't always work out that that's what you get, but that's just a nice framing to which you can understand the whole game.
Mm-hmm. This is a bit of like a larger. I don't know that I want to get into this, but I like the idea of there being sort of levels to play, right? Where the game is very, very simple your first time out if you just do that. Just what do I want the most? Send this thing. And there's all kinds of depths of strategy that emerge as you go along, but it's very accessible just on that first level pass of, even if I don't know anything else, I can do this and get something good.
And as Alex mentioned, at the end of the game, you serve a critic, and the critic only wants there's 7 different food types in the game. They only want to take 1 bite of each. So you want to get the highest quality. So the ingredients that you're gathering are ranked in quality from 2 to 7, with 7 being the best, and well, not ranked, but they have different quality values, of 2 being the lowest, 7 being the highest. You can also get soup, which is 1, but it is a wild. So it can be used as any ingredient, but it's the lowest value. And at the end of the game, you want the best stuff for the critic, but only 1 of each. And over the course of the game, you serve these challenges, and you want to just put as much food into these challenges. So you sum the total. So if it was a challenge that required cheese, bread, and meat, you put as much cheese, bread, and meat in, and you're trying to hit a total of 21 over the course of a bunch of cheese, a bunch of meat, a bunch of bread. And that quantity versus quality, we'll get into that later, but that's again, it's all leading into that central mechanism. So, Alex, you This is a game where you came up with the idea, but also I came up with the idea. I like the pure like shariness of the concept. Do you remember the conversation?
Yeah. So I remember the first time we discussed what would eventually become Critter Kitchen, because like many games, this started in a very different place than it ended up. You were visiting, and we were going to a board game cafe here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I was telling you about, as often co-designs start, I was telling you about an old design idea of mine that I'd never really made sense of in my head. And we're just sort of talking through it to see if we can come up with something together. And the idea I had was, the core DNA of it was actually not crazy different from what Critter Kitchen became. But the idea was we're running taverns in a town that's been destroyed by like a tornado or something. And we all are trying to build a new tavern, and whoever finishes first will get to be the new one, right? Because you get all the business. And my idea was that you had 3 different workers, a small guy, a medium guy, and a big guy. And there was a secret selection of what place you wanted to go to. And then at those locations, after everyone reveals, basically, I think in the way I initially conceptualized it, was just like, if a big guy's there, they get the thing, and everyone else doesn't get. So
at one point, it was mouse, cat, dog, and the dog scared away the cat, and the cat scared away the mouse.
Yeah, it's had so many versions. I don't even remember that.
Well, it's funny you tell that story, because my memory of it's quite different, which is I think you're right. I think your version is more accurate than my memory of it. But I remember the one of the things that you pitched was this idea of like, some people are the mice and some people are the cats and some people are the dogs. And so you were trying to like get to a certain place. Like you said, this went through a few different versions. That came
later. That's the one that eventually became Cat and Mouse, which eventually became Drop Bear.
Right.
That was, I remember exactly when that was. That was way later. That was, okay, I'm going to like skip ahead a little bit here and we'll come back and circle to it. But that idea that Peter and I then worked on became something called Fairy City. And Fairy City, if you'll recall, Peter, started to get very convoluted and complicated.
Well, that's the next part of the story. So you gave me that
then when we split that's when the Cat and Mouse thing came up.
All right, so Alex pitched this idea of the tavern building 1, 2, 3, basically. And I just thought, like, this core idea is brilliant. And this is what I love about working with Alex, is that his ideas are brilliant. No joke. Just genuinely, I think you're a board game savant. And idiot savant, even, I would say.
Thank you.
I would go so far to say, no joke, just an insult in the middle of it. It's so hard to say sincere things, because then a joke pops in your mind. You're like, well, I have to say the joke now.
Of course, I understand. Yeah.
You have the same pains. So Alex pitched this idea, and honestly, I think he was pitching it as something even lighter than Critter Kitchen. But I, at the time, was really into this idea of making heavy euros. Like heavy euros. And Alex and I had been working on, for a while, our greatest unpublished game, which is called Providence. And Providence is a huge 3-hour euro. It's a big, beautiful game. We cannot find a publisher. It is an unpublishable, amazing game. We were finalists in the Carpet Edison Award for that. And we got these messages from the judges being like, we just wanted to play this all weekend. Good luck. And then since then, nothing but rejection. Yeah. No, we had one publisher make an offer, but we didn't like the offer and we didn't like the publisher. So we passed. But I was in this heavy euro space. I don't know if I was trying to prove myself or if I was just like, this is what games should be. So I took this quite simple, lovely idea, and we spent a year and a half, maybe, like crafting this monstrous game around it. And I think of various points in my career as having leveled up. And this was definitely a point before I leveled up where if something was convoluted, I was just like, yeah, that's fine. It's just convoluted. Like, that's just a thing that games sometimes do. And this is something I see. We talk about this a lot on the podcast when we're doing the Daniel.games episodes, especially. Like, so many designers will settle for like, it's incredibly convoluted. That's just what it is. And the more I design, the more I'm like, no, you can fix that. You can improve that. So Fairy Village. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think in terms of like actionable advice for designers, right? That is absolutely one of the best places to try and hone your craft, is when you hit those barriers where you sort of shrug your shoulders and say like, that's good enough. So let's focus on this. Well, come back to that good enough one, because there's a lot of juice to be squeezed out of those. I think.
Yeah.
We've had some of our best moments solving problems that didn't really need to be solved, but then when you end up with something that's so elegant at the end, it feels worth it.
This is day 3 of Alex and I meeting every day this week. And so Monday we had a 3-hour call where we solved a bunch of those problems. And yesterday we executed and found a lot of them were broken and re-solved them in better ways. And then today we're doing a podcast and tomorrow we're diving back in. So it's an exciting week for me. When you see a playtester not understanding a mechanism, even after you've explained it to them twice, the mechanism is always the problem, not the playtester. And this is a lesson I refused to learn on Fairy Village, which is what we were calling it. So Fairy Village was basically I won't go into too much details, but it was a more pure worker placement game. You had a little map of the city behind your sheet, and you'd put where all your workers were. And it wasn't just one of each. You had like a bunch of goblins who were the little, and a bunch of humans, which were the middle, and a bunch of trolls. And so it was sort of like bidding. It was more like blind bidding worker placement. But then it had to resolve in a certain order, and it was just so clunky. It was so clunky and unintuitive and a nightmare.
Yeah, so the map of the city looked like one of those little family circus cartoons with the dotted line of like where the kids jumping around the house. The final line.
And to make up for the goblins being so weak, they could move to a later location. So every time a location was resolved, every time a worker placement space was resolved, you had to resolve the next. Like it was a mess. The one thing I really liked about the game, I'll just flag, is that we had the 3 strengths of workers: trolls, humans, and goblins. And trolls were undefeatable, except for by elves. And elves were like the equivalent of what became sous chefs in Critter Kitchen. They were like one-off hireable workers who were not that good, except that they could chase away trolls. And so I just liked that scissor, paper, rock, hireable fourth party. I just thought that was nifty. Okay.
I was just going to expand on it a little bit more, which was... the core of it was a bit cumbersome, and we never solved that problem. But the race to have like these short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals, I think we never quite made them work in that game. But it was almost a direct one-to-one translation. I don't know if you remember some of the like short-term, long-term little missions that we came up with.
I do not. I normally remember this stuff, but I don't remember that at all.
Well, there was like that whole like pyramid thing at the top where you could go for any of the ones that were revealed, and then when they chip away, it reveals new ones. But there were these like medium-term goals that basically became the challenges in Critter Kitchen, and then there was sort of long-term. I forget what we called it, but like there was like a different something in the world each time, like a ruler of the thing that like gave you everyone a mission or a constraint or something that eventually
really I don't remember any of this. That's crazy.
We never got it working, so we never even like
it was all theory crafting.
It was all theory crafting,
right.
Which is this is not good advice. This is not good advice for designers, but like Peter and I are
inactionable advice.
We have as Peter likes to say, we've leveled up to the point where we can theory craft through bad ideas fast enough. You don't actually need to put them on the table. So,
don't do that. Put it all on the table. Yeah. So we banged our head against this wall for, I think, probably a year, 6 months. It was a long amount of time. And then we decided to take a break from it. We doubled down on Providence. We got that into a really nice spot. Various stuff happened. I think I moved countries in that time. Like it was a tumultuous year, basically. This is all pre or during pandemic too. And that's right, because I came and stayed with you during the pandemic. In early 2021, and just stayed with you for like 6 weeks. So I bubbled for 2 weeks and then came and stayed with you 6 weeks, then flew home and bubbled for 2 weeks to like avoid the virus. I don't know if you remember the coronavirus. It was a big deal a couple of years back.
What is that?
Yeah, no. Maybe it didn't come to Raleigh, except for when I brought it. Yeah. And so we had a big break from that game. And basically you run into enough banging your head against the wall problems that you realize, I do anyway, that like the core of the game isn't there. And again, this is something I think about all the time as a designer, especially when playing other people's prototypes. Like the question I'm always asking as a playtester, and you've seen me do this a million times, is what are you trying to make? Like what's your goal here? And I don't mean it as a player, I mean as a designer. And you get the most interesting answers. I talked before about how Emily Vincent, this wonderful designer from Boston, I think she's from. Before she started, I didn't even have to ask her. She's like, okay, guys, just so you know, what I'm trying to do here is make a board game that gets you excited about experimenting with cooking. And I was like, okay, like this is not an answer I've ever received in my time playtesting. Strap in. And so the answer of what we were trying to do there just wasn't clear. And more than that, like the core tension of the game wasn't clear. The core structure of the game wasn't clear. And the more unclear that is, the more sort of fractured the center of that is, the more unstable the tendrils of the game become, because you can't trace them back to a really clear core. Mm-hmm. And so we had just gone to Unpub 2022, which was in Baltimore. And we were driving home because the driving distance from your house. Just so people have context, do you want to give your full address and SSN?
Sure, yeah.
April Fools! And
can you just put a long beep sound right?
So that was a 6-hour drive. It was a lengthy drive.
It was a long drive, yeah.
And we're both excited.
As we've talked about on the podcast before, we do our best designing either in long car rides or hot tubs or
walking around the neighborhood. So we had a long drive, and that was a really exciting convention. I just signed fiction. It just been like a really good time. And so one or both of us said, "Hey, let's revisit Fairy City." And I mentioned before that I tend to level up. I can point to moments in my life where I've leveled up as a designer. And this is the point where I was like, "Oh, this is so obvious and so actionable." A, not everything needs to be a big heavy euro. That's a really useful lesson to learn. And B, it's really important, or it's really useful, to work out what the game is trying to be and lean into that. And this idea of the 1, 2, 3, 3 beats 2, 2 beats 1, etc., was not trying to be Providence. It was not trying to be Art Nova. It was just trying to be something like more light and fun. As well as that, I've talked about this on the podcast before, Fiction was the game where I sort of Alexified one of my designs, because working with you on various projects made me realize how important, and maybe you can even speak to this a little bit, it is to have those little fun, non-mechanical elements. So Fiction, you need a word of 5-letter, you need a card of 5-letter words, and it could have just been a list. Instead, I made it public domain novels with all the 5-letter words highlighted, and the back of the card was the cover of the book. It does 0 things mechanically, but a million things as a product. So this is something that I think you are idiot savant about. Do you want to talk on that?
Do you have to keep putting the word idiot in front of savant?
Sorry, I know you don't like the word savant. This is the thing that you... do you want to speak to this? Because I think this is one of your real strengths as a designer, and I think we could learn from it.
Specifically in the context of Critter Kitchen, or just in general?
In general, and then maybe zoom into Critter Kitchen.
So I think
you have a passion for this, which is really interesting.
I do. And I think that it's also something that is, and I don't know how, I want to say the word easy, but I don't know if that's just because I've been thinking about it so long. But it's something that I feel like is one of the easiest things that you can do for a low relative amount of effort to improve the game significantly.
But let's say low cost things, because I think that's slightly different from easiest.
Yeah,
I don't mean money cost. I mean like cognitive cost.
Right, because if you think about it, any of us who are designing a game, even if you get to the point where you're really happy with the game, you're spending hours and hours sort of. If you're making it better, it reaches diminishing returns, right? You the first 80% of the game you can get to in maybe like 5 hours, and then the next 10% is another 5 hours, and the next 2% is right. Like you're always chasing that dragon of like, how do I make this the best possible game? But in terms of making it something that people want to play and that publishers want to publish and that stores want to sell, there are dramatic things you can do that are totally outside of the column of design, just in terms of either the physical bits or thematic integration or just, product hooks like with Fiction, that it's basically just brainstorming the ideas. And like, yes, it helps to have done it in the past and have,
right.
I guess it's a skill you can develop as anything else. But I would definitely encourage anyone listening who has a game they've designed that they're happy with the design and they're ready to start pitching it. Before you take that next step to pitch it, just take, half an hour just to sit down and be like, when I picture this game on a shelf or someone opens up the box, before anyone has played a single rule that I've written, what is something that makes them want to play the game? What is something that makes them want to play the rule book? And if the pitch is good enough, if the hook is good enough, it could be that. But there are plenty of games that are very basic games that sell like hotcakes in stores because they have an interesting piece of packaging, or you can look on the back of the box and you see a component you've never seen before. I had a game called Don't Skip Leg Day that came out from Pandasaurus that it's a pretty basic game. It's sort of like Sushi Go mechanics with a twist, but we packaged it in a shaker bottle, like a protein shaker bottle. And so it got into Target on the back of weird packaging.
It's unusual packaging.
And that has nothing to do with the game.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about expansivity a little bit? Because I know that was a big driving force in that.
Sure. So Expansity was my first game. There's I don't know if the camera captures it. There's pixel art of it on the wall behind me.
No, unfortunately not.
Um, the game is a city building game, which is a genre that I really like. So, both in video games like SimCity and in board games. And it could have just been tiles, right? It could have been cardboard tiles that stack up. And I think it might have gotten signed based on, I started
it's a solid mechanism mechanically.
The game's fine. It's good. There's like now 10 years later, there's stuff I would do differently, but it's,
no way.
You like to say that you've got like an 18-month window where like you hate everything before that. For me, I'll stretch it to like 5 years. So it's older than 5 years. And so there's things.
My son turned 2, and I was like, "Get out of the house. You're
done." So the game's fine. And I think it might have gotten signed if it was just like you're putting cardboard tiles stacked up or something. But what I had the vision I had for it was, we're building a city. I want you to actually be able to see the city on the table when you finish the game. And when I say see the city, I mean a 3-dimensional city. So my first prototype, like the very first time it ever touched the table, was Legos, like building towers. And then as I iterated and evolved, I started doing 3D printing. And then the final version does indeed have these very nice, it almost looks like those math cubes, the counting cubes you can stack up. They've got like a little dock. And so when you finish playing the game, you've built this sort of 3-dimensional city that actually has character and charm to it.
And the different colors and everything, aren't they? So you've got this like multicolored. Am I misremembering?
No, it's different player colors, and so then all together it sort of paints this picture. And the tiles themselves, instead of it just being like a square tile you're building on, I insisted when they were doing the art direction, like, okay, but I want you to make the edges of the tile have a city street, so that when you put them together, it looks like the grid of a city. It does nothing gameplay wise, but it just has that vibe. So I think choices like that can go a long way for making games into products.
I feel like this is fairly intuitive for you, so maybe this is not an easy question to answer, but like, is there a way into that you can recommend for designers?
A way into that style of thinking?
Yeah. Or like a starting point, or...
I mean...
Because you often will come in, having worked with you often come in with a vision, and it's like, cool, we just execute Alex's vision, and we're there. But how do you... What's the step before that? Ayahuasca.
Yeah. I don't think there's much of a way around just needing to live in it for a while. I think it's something that you can learn, right? And part of that learning process is looking at lots of other games, seeing what sells well, seeing what people gravitate towards. I know when you and AJ had your podcast about the episode about product and like him as a store owner, like which boxes people gravitate towards. I think that same logic applies to when a game is on the table, and what are people coming up to and playing and seeing.
I did a screenwriting course about 5 years back, and the lecturer, it was really interesting. I learned a lot from it. And one of the most interesting pieces of advice he gave was basically, are you a character person or a plot person? And let's just assume that's a true dichotomy for the sake of this. So are you a mechanics person or a product person in board games? I am a mechanic person. I don't think anyone would argue that. Like, I am so obsessed intricately with mechanics. And his advice was, cool, focus entirely on product. Because I'm a mechanics person, the mechanics will happen. Mm-hmm. The product stuff won't unless I force myself to focus on it. So with screenwriting, I'm such a structure plot person that I took that advice, and the next thing I worked on was just all character. And sure enough, by the end of it, it had like this airtight plot because I can't help myself. Right. It's like forcing yourself to eat your greens, because you're going to eat the dessert and the meat no matter what, but you have to make yourself eat the greens. So if you're not naturally product driven, it might be worth thinking like, cool, starting from that. Start from product. And then if you're a mechanics person like me, the mechanics will come.
And I think it's also, I'm not sure if I'm going to phrase this eloquently, but it's not a first do one, then do the other. I think you can get into a lot of trouble, like if you design this whole perfect mechanically sound game, and then at the end, that's when you start thinking about how could this be a product. Yeah. And I think if you start thinking about a product, and then you get and then you get locked into what the product is, and that doesn't allow you to go outside mechanically, I think it has to be an iterative back and forth, right? Yeah. So, with Expansity, I had the idea for, I guess you would say, the product first, because I had a vision of a city builder game where you were doing a 3D city. Yeah. But then before I got too deep in the weeds on that, I started testing mechanics, and then those mechanics inform product, and the product informs more mechanics. And I think of the finished product on the table as part of the design process, not an
Right.
afterthought to it. And I think if you want it to feel really integrated, it has to be that. The leg day one is an example of one where it's not at all. Like that was not part of the design process, right?
Right.
Like that was a nice happy accident at the end, but it's also a lighter game. I think with Critter Kitchen, we knew at the time of, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit and we'll get to it later, but at the time of signing it, we knew the publisher Cardboard Alchemy was a company that was big into deluxe Kickstarters and extra bits and bling. And that freed us up, design process wise of like, oh, pie in the sky, we can do anything we want with this. And then it's up to them to say no. Right.
Yeah.
And that was very liberating when you know that the final product can be whatever you want it to be. Now that's a unicorn situation. You're not going to get that with your publisher. So it's not necessarily actionable advice, but it's something where I would say there are almost no publishers that want to make a boring, bland looking game and don't care about product.
Right.
Like, outside of like the driest of dry Euros, which are selling, I don't know. I don't want to throw any names out there under the bus, but like the very, very like it's just cardboard in a box.
War games tend to be in that kind of
war games, right? Like they're not looking for a gimmick to get people to pick up the box in the store because their audience
is built in
for gimmicks, right? Yeah. Whereas for most of us, I think listening to this and designing, our audience is hopefully everybody. Like a lot of people.
It's broader than that, yeah.
As many people as will give us money.
Yeah.
And so since publishers are wanting to sell a lot of copies of the game, within reason, a publisher should want to do little hooks that make a good product. I know you just had Joe on to talk about like how All Play likes to have that one like prestige bit, right?
Yeah.
And that it's not that they're going full deluxe like Cardboard Alchemy, but they're still like, okay, what is like this one thing we can do to draw someone in? And
they're still component oriented, just at a different flavor.
Scale, at a different level. Yeah. And so I think as a designer, if you can go in with even just that one bit, that one thing, I really liked what Joe said in that podcast.
Yeah.
So I think that's great advice for designers.
There's a designer local to you who I think is the undisputed king of this, Julio. Julio, like every time you play any of his prototypes, there is a prestige bit that your mouth waters when you want to play it. And he gets a lot of game signed because of that. Like he's a solid designer, very lovely fellow, but he is, I think, the king of bits. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to go back to that conversation in the car because I think about that conversation a lot because over the course of the next 3 hours or however long we talked about it, we designed close to 90% of what Critter Kitchen became before the expansion. So like all the fundamentals are there. And I'm curious if you remember the specifics because I distinctly remember that we started from that like 1, 2, 3. You've got 3 workers. One is one is the best. One is the second best. One is the third best. And at the time, do you want to talk about the ogre and the goblin and the
Sure. So at this point, it was still Fairy City adjacent, and it was. So generic
Magic Market, right? was the working title at the time.
So it's still generic fantasy. So the idea was like you have a goblin, you have a human or an elf, and a troll, right? And
we were still stuck on the troll is the big powerful one who muscles everyone else out of the way.
We knew we wanted it to be like a go fetch ingredients kind of thing, and we're like, okay, so the troll can muscle everybody out of the way, but it's got a small little troll brain, so it can only remember one item. So it goes first. The big guy goes first, but it can only remember one thing. And then, like, the human can remember 2 things, and it goes second. And the goblins get stuck at the end, but they're very clever, so they can remember 3 things. And
I don't know if you remember this. I remember circling forever, just trying to find a replacement for human because it just didn't make sense that a human can only remember 2 things.
Right, you're like a dryad, I think.
Yeah, we had dryad for a while.
Yeah.
And this is actually an important thing, I think, in our creative partnership. Is that things need to make sense, which sounds very obvious, but we increasingly don't compromise on it has to make sense.
That's one of my big bugaboos, because that's one of the things that bothers me when I'm playing a published game that has bits that feel hand-waved. The game we were working on yesterday, the one that the big heavy Euro that's signed, but we're not talking about yet, which I'm sure we'll do a podcast about in the future.
2031.
Possibly.
Not even kidding. that's when that game is scheduled to come out.
Without going into specifics, we had this exact conversation yesterday. Like, oh, well, what if this part did this? And it was sound mechanical. Like, I think it was your proposal. It was a mechanical thing, and it was sound. It would have worked, and it would have solved the problem. except for the fact that within the context of what it is narratively and what it's trying to make players do, it was completely backwards. So it felt unintuitive from a not just a lore standpoint, but I guess like a narrative intention standpoint. If I'm a player and I'm like, what would I expect this to do? It's not that. So
it was flat out wrong thematically, and I'm very okay with that.
and that alone is enough for us to nick something. Like we I think now
our standards are very high.
We are at the stage where we will give import to that equal to does it work mechanically. Whereas I think one trap you can fall into earlier in your design journey is, well, this thing works mechanically, let's find a way to like break and shove in the lore to make it fit. So.
And I'll pick on former Peter. Like, you can see that in some of my games where I'd write a joke to make it make sense.
Yes.
And like, it works in that it sticks in people's head, but you still have to like, what we're trying to do is skip that step of like, wait, how does this work? So in an ideal situation, you go, how does this work? Oh, of course, it's this, so this happens. Like, I'll use a very dumb example. When you're putting a building together, what do you start with, the floor or the ceiling? Obviously, you start with the floor. Now, let's say mechanically, for whatever reason, you had to start with the ceiling. Cool. Now you've got to work out some way of, like you said, forcing this into people's brains. So I would do that with a joke of like, it's upside down land or something like that. And they're like, oh, okay. But I want to skip that step of like going and learning how it works. I want it to just work the way it is intuitively. And so if you have to stop and have a joke and get that into people's head and then come back to the game, that's what we're trying to avoid.
Right. And so that brings us full circle to this with the workers of the 3 different sizes, which we took it to group while you were here, and we'll give a shout out.
Alex lives in the best design community in North America.
Yes. And so fellow published designer Matt Wolf, who has given us lots of good advice on lots of our games, was playing with it, and I don't know, a turn in or something. He's like, wait a second, why does the big guy only carry one thing? And we all just kind of stopped, and it was like, I don't know, because it does. and like immediately we were like, oh yeah, that's stupid. The big guy should carry more things.
and then
arms. It's
the second we got to like the small guy is fast, we were like, okay, bam, nailed it. Yeah. And that was actually the moment where it switched from Magic Market to Critter Kitchen.
Right.
Because we needed again, like going back to this intuitive thought, we needed the small guy to go first. Why would the small guy go first? Because he's fast. How do we make people remember that? People are not going to be like, oh yeah, goblins, obviously they're fast. But, and I'm sure you remember, it was a rabbit at the time. Rabbits are fast. Rabbits are faster than, I think it was rabbit, pig, and raccoon.
Rabbit, raccoon, pig.
Yes, rabbit, raccoon, pig.
The pig was the big one.
Yeah. It was, And again, like the second you see those 3, if I handed a toddler these and said, put them in order of speed, you're going to get it. Yeah. AJ and I have on a list of upcoming episodes, like make it childishly simple. And I think I might use this example again. So listeners, prepare for this one to come back.
Yeah. I mean, I think, do not be afraid of taking from like stuff everybody knows. I don't know what's the word for that. Things that are just like in the aether, the zeitgeist, like just things that everybody knows that. Everybody knows that the small thing goes fast and the big thing is slow.
Right.
Like that's just
everyone knows that rabbits are faster than
our stories are built around that, right? Like it's I have a game
intuitive
called,
almost.
I have a game called Team 3 that's a dexterity building game, right? And it's based on the 3 monkeys, so see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. And the roles of the players in the limited communication are one player can't see, one player can't talk. Like it's that kind of like, well, okay, people already know this framework, so let's just lift that framework whole cloth and build a game around it. Right?
I think I've heard you use the term before, public domain IP. Is that something you say? Yeah,
that is something I say. I usually use that to refer to themes. So one of the games that came out that's done quite well and is very popular is Parks from Keymaster.
Yeah. And not your game, unlike the...
Oh.
You just mentioned like 3 games. 2 of them were yours and the third one wasn't. So unless you designed Parks and just never came out.
No. I said one of the games that came out was that did very well was Parks from Keymaster, and a lot of games since then have wanted to be about parks or park building. I mean, there were ones before that too, but national parks are a great example of public domain IP. Where it is this thing that everybody has a mental image of. People have visited them on vacation.
You have connotations and associations.
You can imagine what types of mechanics might flow from there and what types of situations you might be in, what the stakes are. There's all kinds of baked in heuristical knowledge that you can use to access while you're playing that you don't have to pay 20% to Star Wars or Disney, right? Like it is totally, it's a free thing. So like Christmas is a public IP, right?
Yes.
And older stuff that is now past the point of copyright is public IP.
It's literally public domain,
literally public domain. But like I'm talking about more things like going on a trip, like a game about taking vacations, or like going to a city, a real world.
Let's
city.
go to Japan. Let's go to Japan. Go buy books.
Public IP. Yeah. It's something that everybody has a cultural touchstone attachment to, and you don't need to onboard with them. You don't need to say like, here's all this context you need before you start.
Yes, you don't need to have a page of lore in the rule book to get people into the world. Everyone knows the world. So we're in the car, and we had this at the time ogre, human goblin, and we're just like, I genuinely wish I had a recording of that conversation, because we made so many choices in that call that just stuck. So do you remember how we ended on like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as the ingredient numbers?
I don't, but I do remember it was on that call. We could try and talk through it right here. I know. I will say that I bet we started with 1, and then we switched to 2 at some point, because I know you've referenced Jeff Fraser's
we've been doing the podcast at that point. He's like, always start at 2. So I would have been like, always start at 2.
Yeah, because the jump from 2 to 3 is not as much as 1 to 2, right? So,
and I'm going to say that going up to 7 was your idea, because you have a really good, again, intuition for this kind of thing of like, no, 2 to 5 is too little. Let's go all the way up to 7.
Yeah, I tend to have so for context for listeners, in Critter Kitchen, you've got 7 different types of ingredients, and each one of them can have up to 7 value. And within each ingredient, the distribution of numbers is there's 3 2s, 3 3s, 2 4s, 2 5s, 1 6, and 1 7.
There was at the time. There's not in the final published game. We added a second 6 of everything in.
Yeah, but like, so it had this like stair
curve,
step cadence to it. And I imagine, I just probably had a gut sense that going like 2 to 5 wasn't enough banding, because you want those like power spikes of like where 7 feels way better than a 2. So
we also, I think at that point we made a lot of decisions on that call that just stuck with the game. Not call, on that drive. So we got home, and we did what I think is one of the most intensive 10 days of prototyping and playtesting we've ever done. Mm-hmm. Every day we played that game probably a dozen times, not even kidding, like just again and again and again. So we would pull it out, we would set it up, we would play, we would stop, we would break it down, we would play, we'd stop, we'd break it down. One of the things I really remember about that week, I mean, we solved a lot of micro problems. So 90% of the design came out of that drive. We came home, and
I like to call it the first 90%, and then we had to do the second 90%.
One thing that I distinctly remember, and this sort of ties back to like, let the game be what it wants to be. I was at the time vehemently opposed to victory points. I did not want victory points in any game, or more accurately, I didn't want to start with victory points. So a lot of my games eventually get to victory points, but I was always super interested in saying like, okay, what if there are no victory points? What does that look like? So in early Magic Market, as it was at the time, you won the game by having the best critic meal at the end. So the end of, I don't even know if it was 7 days at the time. I know at some point we latched onto 7, and we were like, everything should be 7. And so everything in the game is 7. Even in the car drive, I suspect we were like, well, if it goes up to 7, there should be 7 ingredients. And then there's obviously going to be 7 rounds. So I distinctly remember that the only victory condition was you add up your critic meal, most wins. Do you remember this?
Yes. Yeah.
But we worked out very early on that you needed a valve of sorts for the ingredients, because you were just like with your 1, 2, 3, you were just collecting more than you could possibly need for the critic. And I suspect we talked about like, what if the critic could take a bunch? And we were like, no, too mathy. Now, one of the criticisms of Critter Kitchen is that it is already quite mathy. So you can imagine how mathy it was when we were saying too mathy. So we very quickly worked out that you needed a way to get rid of ingredients and get something for it. And the obvious choice was victory points. And so I said, cool, let's try not that. Let's try anything that's not victory points. So the way that we structured it was the challenges at the end of each day became money, and then money was the tiebreaker.
Oh, yes.
You'd forgotten this?
I forgot there was money in the game, yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So for a while it was competitive. So it was whoever did the best gets $7, whoever did the second best gets $4, whatever. And then one of my known weaknesses that anyone who works with me will tell you is that I love a blind bid. Oh, I love a blind bid. And so it goes into all my games where it shouldn't. And this was no exception.
Yes. So now it was for the ties, right? Whenever there was
Correct.
a tie at a location for an ingredient, you would take that money and you would do a little handout.
Yeah. And most money broke the tie. Two problems. One is that it disrupted the game to constantly be doing blind bids, which is always the case when I add blind bids to a game. I love blind bids, so I'm like, cool, put more in, but it turns out they're not actually the solution to many problems in life, especially my marriage. That's a whole other story. And secondly, you would still end up with ties.
Yeah.
You would do a blind bid and still have a tie. And I think Alex probably vetoed my suggestion of like, well, then do another blind bid and another blind bid. But we very quickly worked out that blind bids weren't working. So
well, I think there's a good design lesson in there, which is
don't do blind bids.
There's certain mechanics that work better as their own game versus part of a bigger game. And I think blind bidding, I think, I'm not going to say like a blanket statement that it's never good in a heavier game, but I think it is
so much its own flavor that you can't sprinkle it into another game as easily as other mechanics.
If we want to use like a cooking metaphor, right? It's like cinnamon or some like very specific spice where it's good in a couple of dishes, but like if you tasted it in like, let's not use cinnamon. I don't know. Let's say like
steak. If you put cinnamon in steak, it's going to be weird.
Yeah, right, yeah. I put cinnamon in my chili, so maybe that's not the best example. But,
and this is why no one likes your chili.
Hey, that's award-winning chili. But yeah, like there's certain mechanics that go great with everything, right? Like a market you can buy from. Like lots of games have that. It's like, that's like salt or something, right? And then there's some mechanics where you just really want to use sparingly or use in the right situation. And I think blind bidding is one of those. So we got rid of
that. Sorry, I got a call, so my computer's freaking out a little bit. So, we mentioned earlier that you live in Raleigh, which has one of the best game design communities in the world. You can still hear me, right?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yes, good. Sorry, my computer freaked out a little bit because my co-designer, Matt, just gave me a call. And I'm like, not now, Matt. I'm recording a podcast with my other co-designer, while my third co-designer is not here. Yeah. So we mentioned earlier that we live in Raleigh, which has this amazing design community. And part of that is that they have really regular meetings. What's the approximate schedule of like, if you wanted to go to every meeting, how often would that be?
We meet every Thursday at one of the two game stores in the area, and that's usually between like 6 and a dozen people. And then we meet 1 to 2 Saturdays a month. So any given month, you're talking like 5 or 6 meetings.
Gotcha.
High quality published designer feedback.
Because I distinctly remember going to multiple meetings with Matt Wolf, mentioned earlier. And the first time he played it, we were using this blind bidding mechanism. And he said to us, guys, just use a priority track. Like, this is so clearly a priority track situation. And I said, no, blind bidding is the future, Matt. You just can't see it yet. And so we went home and tested it and came back next week or next meeting. And he said, hey, why don't you use a priority track? Because this sucks. And he was completely right. It sucked. And so we went home, we pulled out a priority track, and we were immediately like, oh, we just wasted a week ignoring this advice. I have a general rule. I think we have it in our partnership, and I have it elsewhere, which is if I get a suggestion, just try it. Just try the suggestion. And I am so resistant to being told what to do. Again, see my marriage. And it's just this real issue where if I don't like a thought, I don't even want to try it. And sometimes that might be the right call. But when it comes to game design especially, just try the thought. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think a lot of more like novice designers, people just starting out in their design journey, it's very, very daunting when your feedback would require a radical redesign. Not that a priority track was a huge redesign, but I think when I've seen people, newcomers to my groups that were sort of like reticent to follow advice, or I think about times earlier in my design career where I was reticent to like try a thing, it's because there's this, you get really caught up in the idea of like thinking through why it won't work because you just don't want to take the time to actually build it out. And I think one important thing that we do quite well is we figure out a way to test it. Even if the game is already very far along, we can test the change with an MVP, a minimum viable, prototype chunk. And I think that's what you need to do.
Literally yesterday, we had text on the TTS mod to represent a whole deck of components. We were just like, we only need 2 for now. That'll do.
If you've got a game that, uses blind bidding and someone at your group says, test out a priority track, well, you don't need to like go make a fully finished new version of the game that has every, possible thing baked into it. It's like, literally take out a piece of paper and scribble 1, 2, 3, 4. And,
Yeah.
So
that's the priority. Yeah.
It's always good to test an idea, even if you don't think it'll work. And finding a way to do that as cheaply, like cost of not money cost, but time.
It reduces
costs.
the barrier to actually trying it.
Yeah, because you never know. I mean, even if that works for you 1 time out of 5, that's still 1 out of 5 successes that you wouldn't have had if you weren't doing it.
So there's 2, I think, really interesting elements in Critter Kitchen that I have zero memory of how they came about, and that might be the case with you too, and I'm curious. One is spice and one is rumors. Do you want to give a quick overview of how those work within the game?
Yeah, so there's 2 bits in the game that Peter's referring to. The first one is spice. Spice is a type of token that doubles the value of a matching token. So if you have a carrot that is a value of 5 and you have carrot spice, you can make that carrot value of 10. And so this is a token that has no value of its own, but you can pair it with a high number to make an even higher number. And then the other thing that Peter mentioned is rumors. And these are a deck of cards that tell you secret information about what the critic likes. So, for example, maybe the critic doesn't like even numbers, or maybe the critic wants
lots of spice.
Or maybe the critic
loves carrots.
Yeah, or maybe the critic thinks that, 3s are so good that they're actually worth 6 points, but something weird like that, right? Like it's basically just things that if you didn't know that rumor, you would play the game differently and potentially miss out on some points at the end of the game.
Or it changes what you prioritize as a player. If I know the critic loves carrots, I'm going to be like, cool, I'm going to go hard on carrots today.
For example, let's say you go to a location with that has like a 7 meat and a 6 carrot. Carrots are worth double. The other player doesn't know that. They're like, haha, I sent my mouse, and so I get the 7 meat. You say, well, I sent my lizard. Oh no, I got the 6 carrot. You go first and you take the 6 carrot instead of the 7 meat, and then the other player's like, he did see that rumor. Does he know something I don't know?
Right.
And so in the game, the way they work is there's a deck of them. 3 of them come out that are paired with the critic, and then there are items in the bag you draw from to see the ingredients that have little rumor symbols on them, and if you get one, you get to peek at the matching rumor. So it's just this sort of, you always have the option to go back and look at it, and then it goes back and lives on the table so other people can get it.
So do you remember how either of those came about? Because I do not. I don't think either of them were initial drive.
No,
I suspect rumors were my idea, because that's a very Peter mechanism.
Spice might have been mine, yeah.
That feels like a very Alex thing. If you don't, that's fine. I was just curious if you have a memory of where they came from.
I can tell you what probably drove us to add spice, which is we wanted more granularity without increasing the number of numbers. So if you have, a 6 meat and I have a 6 meat, like it's a little bit unsatisfying, I guess, to...
Well, I would say as well as that if I see you take the 7 meat, because there's only one of each, then that's game over for the best meat. Although best meat wasn't a thing at the time, actually, now I think about it.
No, but it's still... It's...
less defeatist.
Yeah, because especially if there being only 1/7, there was definitely the sense of like, because at that point we did have some of the rumors and things where people cared about, or some of the critics, I guess, cared about like an extra 10 points for the best carrot course or something. And if you get the 7 carrot,
I don't even know if we did, honestly. Anyway, I was just curious.
I bet it had something to do with the granularity, where we just wanted there to be more peaks and valleys. Yeah,
we also might have wanted more stuff in the bag, like more variety of what came out. The whole premise of like there's a 2 meat and a 7 meat is so un-me, especially at the time. Like I want everything always to be fair all the time. So if you look at something like Village Pillage, the cards don't have costs because they're all equally good. And so I know for sure that having like a meat worth 2 and a meat worth 7, where one is just better than the other, was that came from your brain for sure, because I would never come up with that, especially in 2022 at the time. And so
just the game we were working on yesterday, we just recently added a new system where what game is it from, Peter? The Dropout track?
It's also done in Terra Mystica.
So yeah,
and Res Arcana or a few other games. Yeah,
it's a game where players take turns clockwise around the table, and at a certain point, our game is a game where players will drop out at a certain point and just start getting a little bit of like passive reward while other players are still doing actions. And one idea that came from Peter that is working quite well is it's got this deck of cards where you drop out and you take a thing and then you reap that reward. And I think Peter's initial inclination was like, okay, well, balance these things so I'll be equally good. And I proposed something that was like very too good. And Peter was like, well, that one's too good. And I'm like, yeah, but if someone really wants it, they'll drop out first, then everyone else will get to do other stuff, right? Like
and then this is actually, I think of this as a Jeffism, which is you can craft these things. There's nothing to do with Critic Kitchen now, it's just general game advice. You can craft these things to sway the players to do what you need them to do. And I don't think this way. I'm like, no, what's most fun? You should do that. So in this game, for example, we want this certain one to be taken when the last person drops out. It's most fun when the last person drop out takes this and then it activates the thing for everyone, but the round's over, so you can't take them. So we're just making that one the worst one. Mm-hmm. So now staying in the longest is naturally good. And so taking the last one, taking the worst one is going to happen from the last person. And it smooths out some game issues while not being fair in a way that everything's even. It's really interesting. Okay, so let's skip forward a little bit. We decided to add victory points into the game. So once we had that priority track, we were like, well, look, we still have these challenges, and we said, let's just make them worth victory points. And one thing that you are very cognizant of as a designer is when the numbers are wrong for the game. Do you know what I mean by that, or do you want me to go into it?
Yeah, and I think you've talked about this with AJ in other episodes, but basically, tell me if this is not what you're referring to, but the idea of like, if I'm playing a lighter family game and you have to add up a bunch of stuff, and at the end of the game, the final score is 137 to 116. Those numbers feel wrong for the experience you're trying to give. You want your final score for a lighter game to be, I got 12 and you got 10, and we feel good about that, right? And it's subtle, but it matters.
So at the time, I remember we had 5, 10, 15, and that was just so it was easier to move. We had a score track at this point, and so you just moved down the score track, either 1, 2, or 3, basically, for every challenge that you served. And then at the end, you'd just add up all the numbers of your critic score, and that would be your final score. So we were having games ending in the 130, and this was true right up until when we pitched it, actually. So we'll get into development in a moment. But we hit a point where we're like, look, this very early on, I should say, we don't normally like pick one game idea and work on it for 10 days. Very early on in this process, this game was remarkably fun. And I realize we're the designers, so this is 0% modest, but we've made a lot of games. We've made hundreds of games between this, like unpublished and unpublished, mostly unpublished. And there is a huge difference between a game that is immediately fun and a game that you're like, oh, I can see the potential of this, but maybe in 6 months' time. I have a personal rule, and this drives AJ bonkers. I have a rule that if a game is not fun by the second playtest, I don't bother with it.
Yeah.
I'm
increasingly adopting that rule for myself as well.
Yeah. So, now, again, this is sort of unactionable advice. This is unhelpful advice, which was a whole episode we did. And I think I might have talked about this there. But like with Critic Kitchen, we played it. And even in the rough stage, even with the priority track not there, even with like money in the game and blind bidding, it was still one of the most fun things that either of us had worked on. I think it's safe to say. And so that's why we were like, cool, this is all we're doing this week, because Origins was coming up. So we spent that 10 days at your house working. I pulled several, like, if not all-nighters, but close to, just getting the new prototype together. In our dynamic, I think we talked about this in the collaboration episode, I tend to build the prototypes, and you tend to have the children. And
yeah,
because it's mostly because I'm a control freak, and I know exactly how I want everything to come out. And so we worked hard on this with the intent of pitching it to Origins. So in one sense, this game took 1.5 years to start being Critic Kitchen and then got signed 2 weeks later. In another sense, we came up with it in a car drive and then signed it 2 weeks later. It was one of the fastest turnarounds either.
Yeah, depending on how you want to define the start of it, it was either one of the longer games we've worked on or the absolute fastest.
I have a game coming out from All Play called Triangulation. Someday I'll do a design diary on BGG about that. And I want to call it the game that took me 4 years and 3 hours to design. Yeah. Because I came up with the idea 4 years ago and just like ran it in my head for 4 years until one day it clicked and 2 hours later it was done.
Game design is funny like that. I've had that experience on a couple different projects. It's really interesting how much you can bang your head against a wall knowing that there's something good there and then finally solve the puzzle. But to your point about like giving up on things if they aren't fun, I think it has to be the rare case where you really know the idea is worth it to bang your head on it over and over. There was one game that we got signed that hasn't been announced yet, but it's a sequel to one of your games. And we had tried all these different, it's a lighter party game, and we had gone back and forth and tried all these different things. And we got to the point of being like, maybe this just doesn't work. Maybe it's not clever enough. And we decided to put a pin in it until the next time we were together in person. And I came out to visit you in LA like 8-9 months ago or whatever it was, a year ago. And within like 2 hours of talking about it, just like being in the same room and moving bits around, we'd cracked that nut. We figured out what the thing was.
Do you remember that specific conversation? Because I remember that so distinctly.
Yeah.
We hit a point, even in person in LA, where we're like, we got to give up on this.
Yeah, we're like, if this doesn't work in the next hour, we'll give ourselves one more hour of talking about it. And then if this doesn't work,
were done,
we can't waste more time on it. Yeah.
And then 15 minutes later, it was just working.
Yeah.
And that was what. So I want to dive into that a little bit, because that's subtly different. I'm talking like if you can see the core fun in those first two prototypes. So with that game that we eventually got signed, the sequel, we could always see the core fun. We just couldn't get the shape of it working. Like, we knew that the activity, to use that dichotomy that I don't like too much, we knew that the activity was really interesting and fun. It's just that the game structure wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And we genuinely did hit a point where we're like, maybe this activity just doesn't have a fun game structure.
Yeah.
The 4 hours, the 4 years and 2 hours game I was talking about, 4 hours, 4 years, 3 hours, that one was another one where, like, I knew the central puzzle was fun. It was just about the simplest way to get people to that puzzle. And so Critter Kitchen, even though it mechanically wasn't there, like, you could play a game from start to finish, even though the structure wasn't working, the core fun was always there. Mm-hmm. We've got another half hour before I have to run, so I think we're going to actually. No, I've got another hour. Anyway, do you have a hard timeout?
1 hour from now, yeah.
Okay, cool. So we worked on this game. We added the rumors and the spice tokens. We added the priority track. We added victory points in, and we took it to Origins. And again, just like I'd run, the other thing about having a game that's inherently fun early on is that I hate to my bones making people sit down and not have a good time. It is the opposite of why I'm in board game design. And so when I have those games where I'm like, guys, I want this to work, but it's not fun yet, I cringe. I actively cringe at the idea of being like, hey, people who could be doing other things right now, can you sit down and not enjoy yourself for the next hour? Like, that's hell to me. So this is another genuine motivator for why
there's like a social contract that you enter into with the people playing your games, where you're like, some of your like self-worth is tied up in it, where like you almost don't want to show them games if you know they're not working yet, because you're like, are they going to judge me as a bad designer? Because like this, even if you preface it with, I know this isn't working. So when you do
it's not a judgment for me. It's the like, I don't want to be the cause of people having a bad time.
Yeah. So when you have one that works. Yeah. Yeah.
With your personality, you obviously have no problem with that. But for me, who's charming and delightful, I want to make sure the roast of Alex Cutler. Yeah. So one of the reasons why, if a game is popping right from the start, I will table it. I will bring it to the table every chance I get, because, and I'm sure part of it is what you're saying about like my ego's tied to it, but also I'm like, hey, come sit down. You will have a good time. Like, this is not going to be like many of my other prototypes where it's like, hey, can you come suffer so that I can benefit from it? This is, hey, you will have a good time and get to give feedback. Now, I will disclaim that designers, especially if you warn them that, hey, this isn't fun yet, but I want to fix it, that is fun for a lot of people. That's fun for me. I'm sure that's fun for you, of like, there is something here and we need to coax it out. That is a fun little puzzle. It's a fun problem.
I'd imagine this is true for you. It's definitely true for me as a designer who has, been to a few rodeos, if you will. At this stage of my career, it's actually way more fun for me to play a game that's pretty busted, because I feel like I can, or like has like that one big thing that's not working, because if you get to solve that, you feel like this, like,
God of game design. Yes. So I have a game called Which is Which, where again, the fun puzzle was fun and the game sucked. And so I was at Gamma a few weeks ago, and multiple times I was like, hey, everyone, this game isn't fun. And people were like, Peter C. Hayward is bringing us a game that he acknowledges isn't fun. What's going on here? And they solved it. Like, that game got signed 2 hours later. Nice. It was one of the fastest turnarounds from like, this isn't fun, to playtest to signing like crazy. But having said that, if the game is fun, then I want to show it off in the same ways, you get your published game and you want to play it with your friends. That's what Critter Kitchen, or games that are fun from that first or second playthrough, so not only are they starting at a higher level because they're starting fun and it's all up from there, but I love getting it to the table, so it's going to be iterated faster and faster, and I can see the potential, and for me, seeing the potential of a thing is really important for me to work on it. So Critter Kitchen at Origins 2022 got played a lot. There was a lot that game got played, because I just wanted to show it off. And
it was so early in the design process, like you mentioned earlier, it was 2 weeks after we sort of restarted the design process. We went into Origins thinking it was good enough to get signed, but also wanting to use the time as playtesting in case it didn't. Right. So
And I genuinely, I don't remember how much this you're around for, because I lived in that unpub room that year, and you were in and out. We kept running into these little issues. I want to say issues. People kept giving feedback, which is great. That's why you playtest. And maybe because we hadn't done our due diligence, because we'd kind of sped run. How do you say speed run as a past tense? Speed ran. It's like sped run. Because we speed ran that game.
Yeah.
I felt like, oh man, this feedback is not something we've considered. So I started applying changes. And I applied changes. So could you talk about how Constellation Soup works in the final game, and also how it worked? It was the same in our first 2 weeks.
Yeah. So what it
was compost at the time.
And what it was, yes, that's right, which is a little bit less palatable than Constellation Soup. But the idea was leftover food gets thrown down into the compost pile, and there's also this thing called compost, which is just this extra one value ingredient. And the way it works, both initially and in the final game, was if you are at a location, if one of your workers is at a location, and either everything has been taken or everything you want is taken, you are allowed to instead get a singular piece of compost, one singular piece of compost. So if I send if there's a location that has 3 food items, someone sends a mouse, someone else sends a lizard, and I send a boar. The mouse takes one thing, the lizard takes 2, and then my boar would take 1 compost. So not 3, even though it could carry 3, but just 1. And that's how it works now.
Always 1. And people don't like that. People don't like sending out their big guy. And part of it's the framing. If you say, hey, this guy gets 3, and then they get 1, it's like, well, hang on, you said he gets 3. So over the course of the 5 days of Origins or whatever it is, I was like, okay, cool. Well, you can get up to your carrying capacity in compost. So if you went to get 3 and you only got 1, you got 2 compost. If you went to get 3 and you got none, you got 3 compost. And so it just mitigated the bad luck or the chaos or the randomness, or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Another thing is that the rumors were, at the time, I think we only really had 7 rumors that we were really happy with, which was carrots are worth double, meat is worth double, mushroom is worth double. So that was all we had. And someone was like, hey, instead of making these that everyone get, you should be like, for me, carrot is worth double. For you, mushroom is worth double. So I shuffled them up, dealt everyone a random one at the start. Probably some other minor changes that I can't remember. I don't know if you recall any of them. And then sat down to the worst game of Critter Kitchen that I think has ever been played in the entire cycle of that game.
Yeah. They just happened to be with 3 publishers at the time.
Yep. One publisher got up and left after 1 round. One of the publishers who stayed for the whole time and gave some very nice feedback is someone who you've worked with and I'm about to work with. So just the opposite of the, like, this game is always fun. It just... And I don't know if there's anything actionable out here about this, but it was truly remarkable to me how this game was like at peak fun at the start of the weekend. And then all my little changes, all the feedback I was taking, all the little iterations resulted in the most beige, bland experience with 98% of the mechanisms exactly the same.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you wanted to try and turn it into a lesson, it would be needing to know when to be selective about feedback or trusting your instincts as a designer.
Which is sort of the opposite of what I was saying earlier about always take the feedback and always try.
Well, we did. We took it and we tried it and it didn't work. Like it's, but I think it's a really good example of like why design by committee doesn't work, right? Because if we give everybody what they want, it's there's a developer who I won't name, but who I know has worked on a lot of different projects, and they're sort of famous for rounding the edges off of things, like not wanting players to feel bad. So they sort of like, this was a little bit too mean, so let's soften it. And this one's a little bit too, whatever, so let's soften it. And oftentimes the final product that comes out has been so sanded down from the original design that was
so beige
that it's functional, but the charm is gone. The things that make it, the peaks and valleys that made it an interesting experience are gone. And so we 100% went through that with Critter Kitchen. We were making all these little tweaks to make the game a little bit friendlier here, a little bit softer here, give people some extra power here. And then it all came out in this unsatisfying wash that we then had to go undo all the things.
The two lessons that I learned, and I don't know how applicable this is to other people, you often hear, like, there's no sunshine without rain, or whatever the phrase is. Like, that you can't have the highs unless you have the lows. That playtest was when I truly learned that. Yeah, it feels kind of bad when you send your pig out, as it was at the time, and just get one soup. Whereas you could have gone to the soup truck and gotten 3 soup. But making the consolation of, okay, well, you always get it. Truly cutting those lows also neutered those highs. It reduced the band of everything. And I'd heard that a lot, but I never truly understood it to that playtest. The other thing, which I thought was really interesting, is, and again, this is maybe too specific to be actionable, but it's a design diary, so we're going to talk about it. When you say, hey, Alex, for you, cheese is great. For me, carrot is great. Cool. A 7 cheese and a 7 carrot comes out. There's no game there anymore. Like, I'm going to send my mouse to the one with the cheese, and or whatever it is. You're going to send your one with the carrot. And the tension of that game comes from getting each other's heads. Right. If there's a 7 here and a 7 there, which one do I think you're going to go for? And can I cleverly snipe one and get the other? Like, there's a full game there that is lost as soon as you make it asymmetrical.
100%.
So I've talked a lot in the past about how I have a publisher in mind when I design a game. And this one, from the moment it became Critter Kitchen and stopped being Magic Market, I said, you know who this would do really well with? Kids table board games. Helena Capella runs a company in Canada. I've worked with her before. She did my game Bugs on Rugs. Love working with her. Helena's great.
Yeah, this would have been either just around the time or right before Creature Comforts came out.
Yeah,
so
it was right after, because I was like, this would be such a good follow-up for that whole like world and brand, and get that same artist, and it fits. And in fact, they did Cafe Barris, which has nothing mechanically to do with Critter Kitchen, and I'm not like, oh, they ripped us off, but like, clearly she also saw the potential of a food-themed one as a follow-up. So I'd scheduled a meeting with her right-hand man, Sean, and this was right after that disastrous publisher thing. So I was like, Alex, I need 20 minutes of your time, because I'm showing this to Elena. And I don't know if you decided or I decided. If we decided, we were like, let's revert all the changes.
Yeah.
Because even if it's not like as honed as it would be after a weekend of playtesting, everything, like when we entered this convention, we had a solid 8.5 out of 10 game, and we've managed to death by committee it to 4 out of 10. Yeah. And no, we don't want to pitch that.
I think it was both of us. I think we both came out of that meeting and we're just like, let's just tear this thing back down to the studs.
And I don't want to sound like it was a waste of playtesting. I distinctly remember there was some things from that weekend. I can't remember what, but I just remember being like, okay, I'm going to revert everything except for this and this and this. Like little tiny tweaks that had just made the game better. I don't remember anything. I wish I did.
I could be wrong, but that might have been where we made the choice to say that the tiebreak track only moves if it's the first ingredient taken at a location.
So, yes, I think you're right.
So in the previous version of this that we took to Origins, there were a lot more ties that were often inconsequential and felt kind of bad. So as an example of that, let's say, someone sends a mouse to a location and Peter and I both send a boar. And the mouse takes
like a 7, a 2, and a 2.
Right, and the 7 goes away, and then Peter and I, you waste your priority on the tiebreaker track, splitting something that you don't care about.
Yeah.
So what the rule then became was the only time that the priority track changes is when it's the first ingredient taken at a place would be involved in the tie. So basically, you're only ever losing tiebreak priority when it's a good thing that you would have wanted anyway. And I think that might have come out of that one.
Yeah, I think you're right, and just some more like tiny stuff like that. Maybe even something as simple as like, if you already have a rumor token, you can't take a second one of that type. Yeah. Because like you want to do it to screw over the other person, which is fine, but not that interesting. So we always let towards the more interesting. You already know the rumor, you can't learn it again. So I showed it to Sean. He loved it. This game was so solid at this point. He set up a meeting with Helena. I've probably told the story before. And Helena came to me and said, hey, Peter, I don't want to play your game, because Sean raved about it and we are booked out for the next 2.5 years. And at the time, I was really like, this has to go fast, because I think I was worried that someone else would come up with the same game or something like that. But like, I wanted this game to come out.
You were
really
riding away at the next year's Origins.
And so she said, look, Peter, I know you want this out in the next 2 years. We are booked up for 3 years. If I play this game, from what Sean's telling me, I'm going to bump another game for it, and I can't do that, so I'm going to decline to look at the game.
Yeah.
And I was like,
while unsatisfying, that is the highest compliment one can receive. So
it is the loveliest rejection we've ever... Like, they didn't reject the game, they rejected the pitch. And so I took it back to LA where I live, and Alex had worked with Peter Vaughan on Expansity. And so I don't know if you messaged him or...
Yeah, so Peter Vaughan was the head of development at Breaking Games when Expansity got signed back in 2015 or 16 or something. And I loved working with him. He's a wonderful person. And he had, we got together at Gamma once a year and had brunch together and talked about our lives. And he had always wanted to work with me again, but he...
Why?
And he had left Breaking Games and started his own company, Cardboard Alchemy, and
Flamecraft had been a huge success.
Yeah, this was probably about like a year and a half after Flamecraft's campaign, and so it was one of those things where the stars had never aligned in the past, and I hadn't had anything that might have been a fit for him before then, but I think I messaged him and was like, "Hey, Peter's local, and I think you are going the same birds or something." Yeah. I don't know if he reached out to you or you reached out to him. For that
we saw each other every month. So I think I saw him at the playtest event that he ran at the time, First Play LA. And he said, "Hey, Alex, says you have a game." Or I said, "Hey, I've got a game, that Alex has told you about, whatever." Sat down, played it. He loved it. We also showed it to Joe from All Play, who was obviously in an earlier episode of this show. And he also was like, "Yep, I'll take it, done." And that was before we pitched to Helena. So I was like, "Hey, and I want to hold off because I want to show it to Helena. She's the one who signed it for." And his response, I think he said this on his episode, was like, "Oh, yeah, she'd do great with that. You should absolutely sign it with her. Go for it." He's so lovely and supportive. I really like working with Joe. So I showed it to Peter. Peter was like, "Okay, cool. Can we take this and consider it?" And I was like, "Yep, that's fine." And then they came back. And I think, was it Peter came back and said, "Look, we want to do this. And we want to do it with Sandara's art." And we had not been expecting that. Obviously, Sandara is a slam dunk of board game art. She is the standard that everyone should aspire to. And so we signed it with them, and we started the development process.
Yeah, and I don't know if you remember, but I believe the signing was contingent on her being on board for it, like if she had the bandwidth for it, because I think they said they wanted to do it, but only if she could do it.
That's what it was, yes.
So
so they signed it, and we got to sign a developer. And I just want to dive into the development process because this game came about at such a breakneck speed. Like literally from the day we started pitching, from the day we had that car ride to the day we started pitching, it was 11 days or something crazy. Peter Vaughan was a week or two later because I had to come back to LA, and then he signed it a week or two later. So we say signed in 2 weeks. Really, it was closer to a month. But from the moment, we got home from Origins, I don't think we touched it again until it was signed. And we got a signed developer, Chris Strain, who also designed Asking for Troubles. He's a staff project manager and developer for Carbon Alchemy. And I think we thought the game was kind of done.
Yeah, I think we knew that there was going to be some content to make, especially now that we were signing with Cardboard Alchemy.
Yes.
We knew that they wanted bits, right? Like extra content in the box. And we were excited about that. But I think at the point in time we signed it, we probably felt like the actual core gameplay was 95, 98% done.
Yeah. So one of the big early changes they made is we had this optional module called Zoo Chefs. And do you want to quickly explain how Zoo Chefs work?
Yeah, so Zoo Chefs, which is a pun on sous chefs, are extra little critter workers that could either be size 1, size 2, or size 3, like the other ones. But you have to pick them up like an item. So they're at a location called the Chef Academy, which is one of the places you can send one of your workers to. And if you choose to, you can select them, and then for the next round of the game, you'll get them for one single round as a fourth worker. So
and these stem from the elves from Fairy City. Like this is one of the few things where I can directly be like, that's where that came from.
Yeah, and so they all have like a special little twist power. And I think at the point of time of signing it, we probably have like a dozen or something.
I don't even know if we had any. I think we just had them as a concept.
It's a concept, yeah. That doesn't surprise. Like this is not.
Oh, we did. I can tell you exactly why I know we had them as a concept. Go ahead.
I was just going to say this is probably one of those things that's not good advice, but we definitely signed it with a lot of things being a little bit hand waved. Just like we're good for this. Just we'll figure it out as we go. So
so I think it's not that we were arrogantly like this game is done. It was more like what are the changes that'll be made? Because we'd sort of hit the point of like, okay, we don't know how to make this game any better. And there's always scope to make the game better. We just couldn't see that vision. So the Zoo Chefs, so we put together a rule book, and you laid it out like a menu. It was a really lovely little rule book. And at the end, it said, hey, here's the modules that we haven't designed, but we're good for. And again, unhelpful advice. Alex and I have been doing this for a long time. We've got between us almost 20 years in the industry, and people have worked with us. We've got good reputation. People know that we can deliver. If you're a first-time designer, make the content. Maybe not all of it. Maybe don't make a deck of 30 like we ended up doing, but make your 7 that you need and pitch that. And we sat down one day to make the zoo chefs. I don't know if you remember this, and discovered a minute in that we had completely different ideas of how zoo chefs would work.
Oh yes, okay. So the way they actually work in the game is they come out for a single round and then go away. And the way that was it you who thought it was the other way, or
no, you?
It was me.
It was definitely you, because I won that one.
Okay, yeah.
Really actionable advice: keep track of your wins as a game designer, as a collaborator. Always have a tally of who's winning.
I know it had something to do with them being there for the whole game then, but I don't remember how that works.
So the way that zoo chefs worked in your mind, and this wasn't wrong, they didn't exist yet, was that it was a power that was affixed to one of your 3 base workers.
Oh, I don't remember that at all. Okay. Yeah.
And the way that it worked in mine was that they're a temporary worker that you got. And I think the moment I said that, Alex was like, that's cuter, we're doing that. Like, I don't think it was a debate. I just remember that we came into the meeting with different ideas of what it was going to be like.
Yes. That's a good thing to circle back to in terms of talking about product, right? Because at that point, we were signed with a company that was willing to make extra bits.
Yes.
If we were signed with a company that did not have the budget for extra bits but still wanted that content,
the cleanness of no extra bits,
having it be a deck of cards that just have a little different power each time that attaches to one of the existing chefs is a way to do that. But for Cardboard Alchemy, we knew if we have 20, 30, 40 of these little zoo chefs, each one gets a different meeple, each one gets their own unique art. The associated power. We can be very thematic with the powers.
Have we talked about this? Do you remember my thoughts on the title?
Critter Kitchen? Did not love Critter Kitchen at first because I think in Australia, critter has a more negative connotation.
It's just not really a word we say. So for me, it was...
The US equivalent, I think, would be if we called it Varmint Kitchen or something.
I think so, yeah. Or more than that, it has an American ring to me in a way that I think you're right. I think Varmint Kitchen is a bit... I've actually got a game...
Vomit Kitchen, if you can't hear Peter's
Varmint.
Accent, but Varmint.
I've actually got a game coming out called Varmints and Garments. So anyway, so... One of the big changes, so we came back with these zoo chefs, and there's two things I want to talk about here. One is that originally this was going to be a completely optional module, in the same way as player powers are for a lot of games. You can play with them, you can play without them. Peter Vaughan strongly wanted the zoo chefs in every version of the game. Do you remember this?
Mm-hmm.
I was opposed to this. Not hugely opposed, and I'm a big, I trust the publisher to do what they do best. But yeah. I was aware that the complexity creep of this game was already hitting what I was comfortable with for what was meant to be quite a light game. And so having a variable player power come out each round and you have to learn how to grab them and you have to remember to use it. It's only one round, etc., that worried me. Did you remember having any thoughts on this?
I think we were of the same mind on this. We were both happy to defer to Peter Vaughan because he knows games and he knows his audience. But I think it would be fair to say that is actually something, even in the final published games, that ratchets up the complexity of it, having shifts in it, right? So,
but yeah, we trusted him, and we trusted him to know what he wanted. And ultimately, this is going to sound sycophantic. Your job is to keep the publisher happy as much as anything. Don't let go of your core vision. And it's not like the zoo chefs were against our core vision. They also solved a big problem.
There are very few hills you should die on as a designer when you're with a publisher. Always,
who you trust, and you should only go with publishers that you trust.
Always speak your mind when asked, but barring them saying what if one of the critters was Stalin or something, and you're just I don't like that.
I don't want my name on that game.
Yeah, for the most part, the publisher knows their audience. They know what they want the game to be. I would say it's very, very rare that they have changes they want to make that actively make the game worse. Yeah. Usually it's just different. We've talked about that
before. I will say, if you and I had both been opposed to this idea for whatever reason, let's say we both, we tried this and it sucked or whatever, and we'd come to Peter Vaughan and said, hey, we really don't like this. I don't think he would have been publishers, you're idiot. Designers, you're idiots. I think he would have listened. As it was, I think it was a good idea, and I'm glad we did it. Especially because it solved a problem, which is that all the food in the round that isn't taken goes to this one location. So you can send someone there to try to grab the leftovers. But if everything's taken and you send someone there, there's literally nothing for you to grab. by putting the zoo chef there, there's always something to be going for. And I really like what that does for the game.
Yeah, I think Critter Kitchen is a good example. And we've talked about some of these, and I'm sure we'll talk on a few more as we go through the development process. More so than any other game I've worked on, I think it is a game where I'm very proud of the two-bird, one-stone solutions we came up with. There are a lot of mechanical systems in the game that subtly address one or two problems at the same time that when you're learning the game for the first time, you're not even aware that there was a problem there. But what you just described is exactly true. It's like, okay, well, like we have this mechanic that sends the leftover food to a location, and that's great. But if nothing goes there, it feels terrible to go there.
Well, I realized also it feels terrible to go there, and we have a strict rule of breaking ties. So now we're breaking ties to get nothing, and that's garbage. Alex and I will often say this in our meetings. It feels like bad design.
Yeah.
And it's maybe it's an intuitive thing, maybe it's obvious, I don't know, but like when something feels like a hack or a patch or it feels wrong, we will again go to the end of the world to stop that from being a thing.
Yeah, so like an example of like a bad fix to what you just described would be, say, if there's nothing at the Chef Academy, you don't break the tie, and then you've tacked on this extra rule. And that is like
kind of intuitive, but you have to look it up
what
every
I'm saying
time.
Is like that's what we would call like a patch rule, right? And that's something where like that might be good enough, for a lot of designers, and I think that's where we're really good at what we do is that wasn't good enough, but we need to solve it, and we found a way to solve it that not only eliminated the edge case that would need a different rule, but also added like something unique and good.
It eliminated the edge case, but also eliminated the need for an edge case. I guess that's the same thing. I'm thinking of the game that we were working on yesterday with when you drop out, you get a thing. One of those things we had to trigger each round, like it has to for the game to function. And a bad solve would be put out 5, and if no one takes that one, it still triggers. That's a terrible solution. Instead, we put out the number equal to the player count, and that one's always one of them. And so it's always going to trigger. And so you never run into the problem, so you don't need to solve it. It's a pre-solve.
In terms of actionable advice for designers listening, the more you can take something that would have to be like rulebook upkeep and maintenance and force it into the normal flow of the game so that it's happening automatically, I think the better your final product will be.
That's sort of my recent level up, because we're trying to solve all these problems with our big heavy game, and that's what we're going to every time. We're like, cool, how can we make this not a new step or a phase of the game, but just part of the game flow? Mm-hmm. And that's just not something I've thought about much before, and so it's really interesting to incorporate that into our thinking. Yeah. So Zoo Chefs were new. We sat down, and I want to talk about Zoo Chefs a little bit. I know we're running short of time. Thumbs up. You're not on a Mac. It only works on Mac for some reason. For people listening, my Mac camera gives me a big thumbs up sometimes. It loves me. What can I say? We designed these Zoo Chefs, and I don't know if you remember like the crocodile or the original turtle or anything like that. But basically, we had some Zoo Chefs who, remember, you take them for one round, and we had some Zoo Chefs that when they came out, if they didn't collect a certain item, they stayed out for the next round.
Yes. Yeah.
And they were genuinely super fun and interesting. They created all these tactical, interesting decisions, and they are not in the final game. Why are they not in the final game, Alex?
If I'm remembering correctly, it's because there just weren't enough locations if too many of them come out.
Yeah, it was the same thing. We ran into the edge case where like either A, you can send another chef to that location. So now I have 2 of my chefs there.
And you're competing against yourself, yeah.
What if I tie break against myself? Do I spend my tie to win against myself? Or if I'm not, let's say I have 2 2s and you have a 2, does it go me, you? Does it go like, it was a mess. It was a whole shambles. Secondly, as you pointed out, if you get 2 of those in certain player counts, you just run out of locations. You just don't have anywhere to go. And so while they were genuinely fun and interesting, and I think we wrestled with this a little bit, we were like, cut them. We will come up with better ones that don't have these rules exceptions. And that is so, like, this is something I see designers doing all the time, and it drives me bonkers.
Peter, did you know that when they were writing Arrested Development? Yes, for anyone who has not heard that story a million times, Peter likes to talk about how they always cut they
wrote so many jokes that they were cutting good jokes, not just bad ones. They were cutting good jokes.
So we wanted to make so many Zoo Chefs that we could cut the good Zoo Chefs and only have ones that work without weird rules exceptions.
Yeah. And we got there. And there was a brief concern of like, what if we can't? And then I genuinely in that conversation told the Arrested Development story. And so I see designers doing this all the time. It drives me nuts. Like, if one of your cards has any kinds of rules exceptions, that card should not exist. I've said the quote before. It's a screenwriting quote. No scene for a line, no script for a scene. Don't put a scene in because you like one line in that scene. Don't write a script because you like this one scene. The whole thing needs to be holistically amazing. And those cards were just 2 rules exception-y. Restaurateurs. Peter Vaughan loves player powers. He loves player powers. So very early on, he was like, hey, I want player powers in this game. And I think that's when we did put our foot down and we were like, look, we'll put them in as an optional module. We don't want them in every game. And I think he was like, yeah, cool, as long as they're in there.
Yeah, I think in practice they're so fun and simple that I think when I teach the game, even without any expansion content, I do tend to give people
interesting.
But yeah,
I don't, but I'm a purist. I think people online because the game started to come out to backers and we're getting a lot of lovely reviews and stuff like that, and people are saying like, yeah, put them in. I'm glad that they're not mandatory for the first game because I play with so many non-gamers. Like that's almost my primary gaming demographic these days, and I don't want. My assistant, who is lovely, and she's going to come on a future episode and go through my game collection, my game bits, like all the prototype bits. I want to do that episode. She'd be fine with it. She's an intelligent young woman. She's not a gamer. And so it just adds that extra strain that you don't need. So I'm absolutely fine with people putting it in, but I didn't want it to be a mandatory inclusion. I think the last thing that got added later was the carts.
There's one more thing that I think
is
because we touched on this earlier, but never came back to the conclusion, which is the scoring being high numbers.
Oh yes. I've got that in my
You're working
mental
your way
list.
towards that. Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to get through all the stuff that we added because
double teaser. Then go ahead and say your thing.
Because we went with Carbon Alchemy, and they tend to explode games in the best way. They wanted a bunch of content. They wanted more that they could put it as unlockables for the Kickstarter and turn into bits and this kind of stuff. And one thing that they'd been pushing for from almost day one was location powers. And I was kind of like, I don't know what that looks like. Like when you go here, do reverse order, like it's just stupid. It just didn't make sense to me. And then one day we were playtesting in First Play LA, and one of the locations is called the Desert Vendor. And someone was like, haha, it should be the dessert vendor. And Peter Vaughan said, yeah, we'd love that, but Peter won't do it. And I was like, me, Peter. And I was like, oh, you want more stuff that you can get? I can do that. And I literally sat down with a pen and paper. I've got a photo of it somewhere. And wrote out the first 7 carts. So carts add to various locations, and they add more stuff that you can take there. And they all have like unique little mini games, essentially. And it became its whole expansion called a la carte. And we submitted, 30 of them, and 18 got in.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Because when they were writing Arrested Development, they wrote too many jokes, and they were able to cut out the best jokes and still have great jokes.
Here, is this going to show up on the camera?
Oh, you found it, the piece of paper. Yeah. I'll put it in the show notes too.
I have your. It's too blurry, but I have your design diary on BGG pulled up.
Oh yes. We did these extensive design diaries. I say we. I did these extensive design diaries on Board Game Geek. If you want to go check those out, we'll put a link to those in the comments. I asked on the Carbon Alchemy Discord if anyone had any questions for us. And one person had an interesting question that I didn't know the answer to. Who named the locations? Do you remember? Because I assume it was you.
Good question. I definitely had involvement, but I think it was actually Peter and Chris. Peter Vaughan and Chris Strain. I think most of it came from them. Like one of my funny stories is that there's a location in the game called Lantern Lane. And I actually live on Lantern Lane. I live on Lantern Walk Lane is the name of the street I live on. I did not name that location. That was just a complete coincidence.
There's also another one that's named after your SSN. Can you just quickly say what that is so that we...
Yeah. No, so like I didn't name the desert vendor. I didn't name the when we were doing the world building of the game, we talked through like
I know you named Bistro Bay. I know for sure
I named Bistro Bay. Coming up with the name for the city was something that we had gone back and forth, and I think Critter Kitchen was probably my
100%. I was opposed to it.
Yeah, and then I had built out like, okay, so like there's, a market by the docks and a market over, I had lore ideas, but I didn't actually.
Right.
I think it was someone at Cardboard Alchemy that actually put that touch
on it. Yeah. We quickly found out that with more players, you needed more spots, and it needed to scale more than just 3 more per player. So we ended up with, I haven't gone into the Midnight Merchant or anything like that. But the other thing I want to mention too is that when we switched from Magic Market to Critter Kitchen, we quickly realized that this game had no magical element to it. And that was part of the reason we were very happy to switch from Magic Market, because it wasn't like magical things happening. It was just you go to a market and you pick up some fruit and you come home and you cook that fruit. And there's no magic in that. There's a game called Harvest by Trey Chambers, and the second edition came out from Keymaster. The first edition was from TMG about 10 years ago, and it is completely magically themed, but there is no magic in that game. It's the most jarring disconnect where it's like, yes, you're collecting magical pumpkins and you can plant them in your garden and grow more pumpkins and then sell them at market. And it's like, well, hang on, why aren't they just pumpkins then? And sure enough, for the remake, they just made them pumpkins or whatever they changed it to. And so we came in being like, hey, look, we don't want magic in this game. And Peter Vaughan balked at that because they'd just done Flamecraft. And so they were like, look, we think we want to do this fantasy. And I remember being like, but it's not fantasy. And so I don't know how much was just me misunderstanding, how much was a compromise. But the final game is not fantasy, but it is. It's this weird mix of like when you have what's the example? A mouse, like the mouse in the game has wings. Mice don't have wings, but it's not a fantasy creature. It's just a normal mouse, but with wings. So it's this weird blend in between.
Yeah, it's not hybrids. It's more like 80% what it is with like a little bit of a twist, right?
Yeah.
So like the giraffe has scales, or the
yeah.
the tiger has purple stripes, or stuff like that. It's just a little bit out of the ordinary.
We worked really hard. So every zoo chef is an animal. Every critic is an animal. And we worked really hard to theme all of those. I'd spent so many hours researching like what animals will eat spice, and it turns out that parrots eat, because spice is a poison to the animals. Like that's why plants are spicy, to deter animals. Parrots don't care about spice, and this other animal don't care about spice. So anytime we had something that wanted spice, we made it one of those animals. And so we worked really hard to theme all that.
It's interesting because so much of the gameplay mechanics that are associated with various critics and zoo chefs and things like that are starting from a what is this animal and what do they do position.
Yeah.
And that is incredibly fertile ground for design. But I don't actually know if it's good advice or bad advice for designers to think about that in their game, because I feel like it's so done now. I
think the broad advice of start from theme and make it work. It's like we were saying earlier. Rabbits are fast and pigs are slow.
Yeah, but in terms of like this game makes sense because of these creatures are anthropomorphic, cute animals in a world. There's a lot of games that do that. We were certainly not the first. We will not be the last. But
we were pitching it based on creature comforts, which is literally that.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the stars. So at the time of signing, you would add up your challenge scores, which are on a central score track, and then you would add up all your critic stuff, and you would double it, and so you ended up with these scores. I think the average was like 180. Like we were talking like way
especially
too
once
large
you
numbers.
add in that extra content.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It started to really creep up.
We had games in the 200s, I think, once you added in cards and stuff. Yeah.
And so the developer, Chris Strain, had done this. It's so interesting because this is a true collaboration between you and him, in a sense. He had come up with this thing where instead of getting 5 and 10 points, they didn't want a score track. The score track is wrong for this game. And it's similar to what I was saying earlier about like you and numbers. Some games are score track games, some games aren't. It's an aesthetic thing. You just have to learn to identify it. And so we had a score track, and he wanted to kill the score track. So instead, challenges were worth 1, 2, or 3 stars. Later, we changed it to 4, or maybe it was 4 at that point. I can't remember. And so when you finish the challenge, you'd get these stars, and at the end, every star was worth 5 points. And you reversed that because of your number thing. Talk about that.
Yeah. So what we switched it to was you get the stars for doing challenges, and then at the end of the game, your player board flips over to a score track. So it's not this like maintenance thing during the game. It's just this discrete step of, okay, we're scoring the critic meal, and you just move your meeple along and you get a score. And then each row of it's 1 through 7, and then 8 through 14, 9 through 21. At the end of each row is a star, and just however far you get, you just go down the side, and that's how many stars you get for the critic meal. And
that's
so
it
divided the final scores by 7. So instead of it being 140, it's 20.
20.
Yeah.
So. And now scores are between 20 and 40 stars on average, like even with everything in there.
Yeah.
By the way, if you're interested in this game, you can see 4 different designer versus designer matches that Cardboard Alchemy put together, where Alex and I sit there and play and talk through our decisions.
I did quite well at the beginning.
Alex won the first 2, and I overwhelmingly won the next 2, so I'll have to have a tiebreaker. And so... Yeah, and that was just, coming up with that score track, I don't know if you remember, that was months of effort. That was
my gosh. because it was there were so many early versions of it that just the UI was just so unintuitive, and just that is an example of something where like I don't think I had input, but I'm not a graphic designer, right? And so Chris just iterated and iterated and iterated, and like the final version's fantastic. I love it. It's super clear, but it was a lot of false starts and trying to figure it out. And it's Critter Kitchen is a great example of a game that could be so much worse if it was with a publisher that cared less. Like Cardboard Alchemy cares so much about the final product.
Yeah.
And
well, they only do on average one game a year. So they spend a year plus 18 months on every game with a team, like a full team working on it. It's incredible to watch. It's incredible to be part of. I should get them on for our published series. So the last two things on my list to talk about, and obviously anything that you have as well. I am an amateur screenwriter. I'm an aspiring screenwriter. And so I had for a while a screenwriter partner who lives in Florida. Lovely, lovely gentleman. And he came over to LA, and I had a prototype of Critter Kitchen, and I wanted to show off my game. And this is what I mean when I say, like, I didn't want restaurateurs to be part of it, because he's not a gamer. He's a very clever man. But if I can trim one thing away, I want to do that. So we sat down, my housemate at the time, my screenwriting partner at the time. I'm not really in contact with him anymore. I burned bridges very quickly. I'm divorced. I don't like Alex. There's a whole list of stuff. And we played Critter Kitchen. And this guy is incredible at giving screenwriting notes and does not game. Like, maybe he's played one game of Cards Against Humanity. Like, he's just not a gamer. And so at the end, I was like, what do you think? And he's like, I liked it, but I think these locations are in the wrong order. And I was like, intriguing. Tell me more. What the heck are you talking about, non-gamer person? And at the time, this will not mean anything if you haven't played the game, but the locations went Soup Truck, Chef Academy, normal location, normal location, normal location, Midnight Market. And so the art, which was done at this stage, sort of showed the day getting darker as it went along. Because at one point, each round was going to be a day. We moved away from that. So now it makes no sense on multiple levels. But the art was such. And the Chef Academy, the second location, was where all the food went that no one took, and also where the zoo chef was. And so actually, when I say that the zoo chef solved a problem, they would have solved a different problem, which is that location had nothing in the first round. And so it immediately just solved that problem, because all the food that went to it would be to pick up the next round. So you always knew what was in each location when you were going there. Mm-hmm. And he said that the Chef Academy should be at the end. We haven't talked about Midnight Merchant. Midnight Merchant's just like 5 random items when you get to it. So you know that there's going to be 5 things there, but you don't know what they are. That was 100% Alex's idea. I guarantee that.
I like random. I think I also added the cart that added gambling on random stuff in the bag. I like random stuff in my games.
It's great. It like all these little things, they make the game 10% better or 1% better, but that last, like you said, the second 90% is the second, yeah. Anyway,
we earned the second 90% on this game.
Yes,
we did a lot of
we put so many hours into this, and so he said, "Put this at the end," and I was like, "Okay, interesting note," and it felt weirdly right immediately. So I went home and I called Alex, and I was like, "Alex, my screenwriting partner just gave me this note, and I think he's right." At this point, we were months from the Kickstarter. We were like, art was done. Games were literally about to go to reviewers. Like, this was not early in the process. This was very, very late in the process. And as mentioned, Alex and I have a rule of we just try it. So we set up a game on TTS, we moved that location, and I did not think that this game had the capacity for like even a 1% improvement. And this was like a 3 to 5% improvement. Like, this was far better than it should have been. And we were both like, oh no. Oh no. So we called Peter Vaughan. And to what you were saying about like every publisher's different. We called Peter Vaughan and we were like, we think we want to change the order of locations. And he's like, haha, good joke. I know it's April 1st when you're recording this podcast several years in the future, but right now it's not. So we're obviously not doing that.
Right.
And we said, can we just play it with you? And we played it with him and he was like, oh no.
Yeah, everyone does the same.
It was just so clearly better. And again, I don't know if there's any actionable here other than like it's never too late to play test and make radical changes late in the game. But
being willing to be open, I think the advice applies on a earlier scale as well, which is a little bit like what I was saying earlier, where people get really in love with their version of a game they have and they aren't willing to like actually make the effort. I think it's the same advice as that. It's just be willing to try it because you might be pleasantly surprised. Yeah.
Which we were. And so Claudio, my screenwriting partner at the time, is I think in the rule book as a special thanks because like that was such a distinct improvement. What was the other thing I want to talk about? Oh,
Did
no,
you
it's
want to
gone.
say anything about either going to 6 and 7 or solo mode?
Oh, yes, good call. We're going to have to speed run it now because we are butting up against the next meeting. The thing I wanted to say was actually that good on Carbon Alchemy for like taking that, because the thing is, like, they care about the game. They deeply, deeply, deeply care about the game. And so when he saw that it could be, let's say, 3% better, he was happy to shift timelines and move stuff around and do a really rapid rate of playtesting.
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge takeaway here is it's great to work with someone you respect and trust, because what this game ended up being as a final product is, way more a result of Cardboard Alchemy's choices and scope than just what we did as designers. Like, the final product is way better than the sum of its parts.
The game was originally pitched and designed as a 2 to 5 player, and we always thought it'd be nice to go like up to 6, just because 6 is like such a nice big play count, and I couldn't get there. I would beat my head against the wall again and again and again. Couldn't work out how to get to 6. And then one day Alex said, it'd be nice if this game went to 7, because everything in this game is 7s. I was like, oh, I could do that. Like, I just thought there's an old story, there's an old fairy tale about a wizard and a king. The king is turned into a dragon, and he's like, wizard, turn me back into a king. He's like, I don't know how to do that. I can't turn you into a king. What I can do is turn you into a king with 3 heads and then remove 2 of the heads. And so it's still him turning him into a king.
Yeah.
But he couldn't get there through the linear path. He had to take this weird thing. And so the 6-7 player mode in Critter Kitchen, as soon as you say 7, it's such an audacious number. I just did an interview with AG where they kept talking about like their big, hairy, audacious goal, which is a business talk, a business expression. When you get to 7, you can't just add more locations. It doesn't work. You have to fundamentally rewrite a part of the game. And so we just went down to 2 chefs each. And originally you'd roll a die and it would be random which of the ones you got cut out. And you know what happened, Alex? You do, because you were there. Constant ties. Every round was tiebreaker after tiebreaker after tiebreaker, because it turns out when you have 7 people with two sizes each, you are on the same number of spaces. You're just constantly intersecting. And so Adam Mahoud, who's a very, very lovely game designer, who I know from Convention Circuit, he said, what if you just let people choose? And again, it was one of those things like, oh, yes, that's obviously correct. And we tried it and it was immediately fixed all the problems. And so 6-7 player mode exists because of that suggestion. Solo mode, I talk a lot about above the table and on the table. I literally, last episode I recorded, I talked about this, where above the table is a game like Skull or Resistance, where it's about like looking in the eyes of your opponents and trying to work out what they're up to. On the table is like, your chess or your Expansity, for example. Like it's a game where this is the game. The mechanisms and what you're doing is the game, and the people are like fun competitors, but they're not where your attention is. Critter Kitchen is this split between above the table and on the table. Above the table, also called Yomi, is the Japanese term for it, which I really like. And the more above the table a game is, the less you can solo mode it. You just can't do it. You can't have a solo mode for Resistance. It literally just doesn't make sense. You'd have to design a whole unrelated game that is technically using the bits, but it's not Resistance. Because the Critter Kitchen is split, I didn't know how to do a solo mode. And do you remember how we cracked that? Even?
I've said it publicly before, I'll say it publicly now. I did very little on the solo mode. I was happy to talk to you and entertain your ideas and play it with you or watch you play it. But the solo mode was, whatever percent you want to split between you and Chris working on it. So I don't like solo modes, and I don't know how to design them. It's just not something in my.
I like puzzles, and it's a puzzle. Yeah. Anyway, so I had this very elaborate solo mode. I always start elaborate. This is true of Critter Kitchen as a whole, and it's true of the solo mode, where like you had this little card that you checked all the bits, and you slid this other card onto it, and all this kind of stuff.
I remember that. I remember you had like the sliding card system. Yeah.
And I was immediately surprised by how well it worked. Like, obviously, you're not getting ahead of the AI opponent, but it felt like you were. Like, you were immediately like, he went where why'd you do that? Like, it felt personified. And so Chris took that mess of a system and took the most fun part out of it and made that the whole system. So I considered, like, I insisted that Chris get solo mode co-design and that you didn't. I insisted, no. But similarly, you get a world building credit that I in no way deserve because you did all that world building. And so, yeah, the solo mode is this really cute little... we had a big conversation with the publisher. Oh, man, there's like 4 stories I want to tell, and I got 12 minutes before next meeting. Where we had 2 options. We're going to make a big, crunchy, like, solo mode for the solo players, or we can make a very light solo mode for the cozy audience. And we ended up going that direction, which I think was 100% the right choice, especially because we can now just release the other one on BGG afterwards.
Yes, and I will also say that I've been very surprised by how, like, we're in the Critter Kitchen Facebook group, right? Like, there's a Facebook group for fans of Critter Kitchen. I'm surprised by how many of the people that are, like, non-hardcore, like, just cozy gamers have shared pictures of them playing and complimented the solo mode. Like, it's definitely, it is making people try it because it is so accessible.
Okay, I'm going to speed run my last 3 stories. Are you ready?
Yes.
We wanted a bunch of carts. And so Alex had this really clever idea of starting from component because Cardboard Alchemy said, look, blue sky it, whatever you want. So we started from a die and we built the cart around that die. We started from a pie dial thing and we built a cart around that dial thing. We also did all the mechanical stuff of like, rumors. How do we make a cart about rumors? We end up with, I think, everyone's favorite cart, the newspaper cart, which is just like all rumors all the time. Super fun. So that was just a really interesting, like, for me, way to do it, where you start from the component.
A big one because we knew Flamecraft had like the metal coins, and we're like, well, our game doesn't need coins, but we're going to put them in there.
Yeah, and then once we had the component and or the theme, it's very easy to come up with mechanisms, same way as Zoo Chefs. Okay, speed round 1 done. The 2 bags. Do you want to talk about the 2 bags?
Yeah. So in Critter Kitchen, you do a blind draw from a bag to seed out the ingredients at the different locations. And we had the appropriate amount of tokens for the game. And the way it would work is as tokens got spent and used, they would go into the second bag. And then when the first bag ran out, you would take the second bag and sort of start over at the beginning. Am I getting this right, Peter?
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
The
reason we did this was my weird obsession with fairness. You had to see every token in the game. Yeah. I don't know why I insisted this, but I really did.
Yeah, and so you'd have weird situations where it was so disparate at player count. How, like, I think at a 5-player game you might go through the bag twice even, or like very rarely.
Well, we used to take tokens out based on player count, which nowadays I'm like, ugh.
Yeah, gross, right? Like, disgusting. But it was one of those things where, like, there were these edge cases where, like, we weren't 100% sure of the math, but, like, it seemed like there was this chance that you'd actually run out twice at a high player count game, but you might not even get to see everything in a 2-player game. And it was just really messy. And then the solve became...
And it was an ergonomical nightmare because it was like, okay, put them into this bag. Not this bag. Put them into this bag. Yeah. Okay, and then halfway through the game, the bags would switch. So it's like, oh, that bag you've been putting stuff into. No. Yeah. That's no longer the bag. This is the bag now.
Ugly. It was just so ugly. The solution we eventually came up with was refrigeration, which is the idea that your kitchen can only store so many ingredients at the end of the 3rd round and the 6th round, and anything that you can't serve or store gets thrown back into the bag. So you can't just hoard everything and keep it out of the economy. So in practice, what you have is there's enough tokens for at any player count to get you to the end of the 3rd round, and then everyone serves their challenges. Those get dumped back into the bag. Everyone saves up to 5 ingredients. The remainder gets dumped into the bag. And then it's the same bag every time, and it just keeps going.
It's so much better. We actually had refrigeration. The change we made was, it used to be just, you can always store 10. And we were just looking at it being like, you never store 10 after the 3rd round. Like, that's so high. So we changed it to 5 and 10. And this is the kind of arbitrary number keeping in your head that I don't like in games. But it was printed on the board, so I was very okay with it.
Yeah, I think that's an example of a patch, but it's a patch that solved so many problems that it was worth the
it's visible. It's not a thing you have to keep in your head. Like, the question of how many things can I store is answered regardless of whether it's 5 or 10.
Yeah, you talked about in some previous episodes, right, of like you don't want to have a hand limit unless it's visually enforced in some way by having like slots in front of you on the table.
So having a refrigeration limit at all is arbitrary, so you have to look it up by looking at the main board that you should be looking at anyway. So having those numbers be different from round to round, I don't think adds more than an iota of cognitive overload. Okay, my last one that I'm going to speed run is Chris Strain was the developer, and he had correctly identified that there was this weird disparity between the challenges, where it's as many as you like, and the critic, where it's one of each. And this had been really important from a design perspective because the 1, 2, 3, the mouse, the lizard, the boar thing, meant that you needed that duality between quality and quantity. So that, like, it all stemmed from the same central thing. And Chris suggested an alternative to the critics that we just hated. I think all of us would agree it just didn't quite make sense. But what we ended up doing to fix that was we did a few things. One is that at the end of the meal, at the end meal when you serve the critic, the best of gets a star, which is now the victory points of the game. So having the best meat, the best cheese, the best fish, just flat out gets you a star. And that addition, A, it weighted things a little bit more towards the critic in a game that really needed it. And B, it just made it clear that you were going for quality. Like, it was just one of those little mechanical things. It is a new rule. You can't deny that. It's a fun rule. It absolutely earns its keep. And it does this subtle thing of like reminding you of how the game works. And the other thing we did was, and we did this actually quite early, so it was before this became an issue, but it really helped, was we made a starting critic. So we haven't talked about this at all, but every critic in the game, each game you play with one critic, and each critic just adds a global rule. So, for example, if you're playing with the kangaroo, all the sixes go upside down and become 9. So now 6 is actually the most valuable number, which is crazy. It's a lot of fun. And you start this game by playing the mouse for your first one, and the mouse has 2 rules. One is that you can serve them as much cheese as you like at the end of the game. It's not just limited 1, it's as much as you like. And secondly, the mouse gives 3 stars for the best cheese instead of 1. And the being able to give them as much cheese as you can, this is what the phrase, the exception that proves the rule, literally means. If a sign says no parking Thursdays, they are giving you the exception which proves or suggests the rule of you can park there the rest of the time. So by the first time you play, the rule being you can serve as much as you like, it tells you that is not normally the case. You can serve as much cheese as you like, which means there is a limit on the other ingredients. So that was an example of content, like especially curated first game content, telling you how the game works. And a combination of those things really helped make the challenge critic dichotomy clearer. Okay, Alex, any final thoughts before we go into our segments and I get to my call on time?
No, I think that's really good. I think having on-ramping for like your first gameplay is great, especially with a lighter game. And I also think that one thing that the Best of Stars did that's really nice is it gives more players the opportunity to have victories at the end of the game. It's not just there's one winner and everyone else loses. You get this moment of going around the table, sharing this experience of like, well, I got the best cheese, I have the most soup, you know.
Yeah. One thing you and I have been learning in our partnership is how important those presentational moments are. Because in the past, you could just sit down and just add up your score and be like, cool, I got 15 stars for my critic meal. Whereas this way, it was like, hey, everyone, what was your cheese? And it's like, oh, wow, you got 14 cheese? Damn it, I thought I had it at 12 or whatever.
Yeah.
Cool. Alex, so we like to end our episodes with a little tip on how to get your game published. Or how to guide your game design in a more publishable way. This is something that people requested. You know this, you've been on the show before. I don't know why I'm belaboring the point so much.
Yeah, so what did I say last time? Bribery?
Yeah, he said sleep your way to the middle.
No, I think last time I said, go to shows, put yourself out there. I think I'll double up on the product note, which is if you are publishers are seeing a lot of games. They're seeing
hundreds and hundreds. You've worked as a scout before.
I've scouted and I've been ahead of development, and it's a lot. You see a lot of games, and a lot of them just blur together. You need to have something either in the physical components or the visual theming of your game that I have not seen before to really make me take a second look. It's not fun advice, I guess, because you might have a really mechanically sound game, but if it looks like 20 other games I've seen, you just don't get the kind of, especially if you're doing cold calls. If we're at a show and you've booked a half-hour meeting and I'm playing the game, maybe then it's my job to see that next level, like what Joe was saying, how he likes to be the one who does the next level.
The scout at Pandasaurus before you was John Gilmore, and I sat down with him at Unpub and played That Time You Killed Me before it had a campaign element. It was like, cool, you've shown me a really excellent abstract game. I've seen this 6 times today. Not literally, but I don't care. And I was like, well, it's going to be a campaign. He's like, show me that. An abstract game with a campaign no one had done before. Right. And so when I built that and came back, and he was like, yes. And then it eventually got published by Pandasaurus. So the game was always mechanically sound, but the sexiness was missing.
For sure.
Okay, we're going to have a little bit of fun, and we're going to have the fastest amount of fun possible. Are you ready, Alex?
Yeah, 1 minute of
fun. Show me your shirt. It is a lovely Critter Kitchen shirt. Mine is a Charlie Brown shirt, which I think is very cute.
Yes. That is all. So that means the listeners to the podcast got to have no fun.
Yep, as they should.
Peter, describe something that someone who's watching this could not possibly fathom. So that it's like do you know the thing that's I secretly loathe the color block.
Yeah.
Little pixel dots.
Thank you all so much for listening. Alex, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me for 2 hours about that game.
Anytime. This was fun.
Well, we've already done this episode, so we're not going to do it again. That wouldn't make any sense.
Okay.
What a stupid note to end the podcast on.
Well, I am an idiot savant, so.
This was great. Thank you so much, and I will talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. You can find us and our incredible Discord community in the show notes, or reach out to us privately at funproblemspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoyed the podcast, please tell a friend.